Welcome. This is Heidi Williams, and I am a Senior Technical Assistance Consultant with the REL Southwest, and I'd really like to welcome everyone that has joined us for this webinar. It's a very exciting session, and we're super excited because the results for this partnership and the professional learning study that we did became public today. So it's extremely exciting. I'd like to introduce some of our presenters, as you can see written here, but I think you'd like to actually see their faces. And I'd like to start with some of our alliance members. As you heard Jackie explaining before in the intro at the beginning, we've got several research alliances. One is located in Oklahoma, and we've got some fantastic members of that alliance. And they are Sharon Dean, who is the Associate Director at University of Oklahoma, Susan Pinson at the Oklahoma State Department of Education, and Catherine Steno at the Office of Educational Quality and Accountability. And then not to diminish her at all, we've got Pia Peltola, who is our senior researcher that headed up this study that we're going to discuss today. So what we'd really like to do is just kind of discuss our outcomes, and we'd like you to become aware of how a research partnership can be formed, and the expertise of both partners, the researchers and our practitioners, can influence that research and make it very, very useful. And then we'd like for you to consider how you could use this information to conduct your own partnership, not just to hear about ours, but to think about, how can I do this? And we'd like for all the participants to become aware of the rural and non-rural access to promising professional learning practices of the teachers. So very ambitious, a lot of different things, but start thinking about not only of what have we learned about the Oklahoma access to promising practices, but how you can use this type of partnership to do some research that you want to learn about. So, as you can see here, we've got the different alliances. We've got the Oklahoma Rural Schools Research Alliance, and that's who is really leading this particular webinar. And what, as you can see, the name is Rural Schools Research Alliance. So Jackie, if you could put out the poll, we'd like to find out who who the people that are listening, how much experience you have had with rural education issues. So if you take a moment, let's see. This is interesting. It's pretty close. We've got majority have some experience, but we have some that have not had any experience with rural education issues. So I would ask the people that have experience, please, down in the discussion pod, share your insights. What have you learned? What can you contribute? And the people who have not, feel free to ask questions and lend in your experiences on what you know about each of these issues. And throughout the whole thing, please enter your questions down in the discussion and Q&A pod, which will replace, it'll replace this introductions pod, and put those in there, because we're going to keep those questions, and I will ask the presenters at breaks some of your questions. So please put those in there. And our first presenter will be Sharon Dean, and she's going to tell us about some of the need for research on this topic. Sharon?
Thank you, Heidi. Good afternoon. I find it very interesting, as Heidi said, that half of you, kind of 50-50, have been with experience with rural education and without. That's kind of where I was personally. I spent half of my public education career in rural schools and the other half in an urban setting. And while there are certainly specific challenges to what's going on in our rural schools, there are also those challenges that some of them are very similar in our urban and suburban schools. So I became a member of the Alliance right after it started. It wasn't the very first meeting, but in that first year, and we were very collaborative. We represented a wide range of stakeholders in the state of Oklahoma, and obviously, if you're not aware, Oklahoma is almost 70% rural in their school districts, and so there was kind of a passion there for what's happening in Oklahoma rural schools. So when we look at, well, how does Oklahoma rank in its rurality as compared to the United States? That in Oklahoma, 30% of our students are attending schools in a rural school district as compared to only 15% in the United States. Of those students, 60% or more are students from low-income families as compared to 50% in the United States. And then when you look at the minority students of color, more than 40% of our students in Oklahoma are of color as compared to 25%. And the majority of our students are Native Americans. So when we have this as our background, and this is what our stakeholders know about our state, we were coming together for the purpose of addressing the challenges of education in schools in Oklahoma, with the majority of them being rural schools. So the very first part of our first year of our meetings, again, such an opportunity, and feel very blessed to be part of a group of stakeholders, that we brainstormed what were some of those issues, what are some of those challenges. And as an alliance, we prioritized those, and you're going to be very fortunate today to see some of the results of what we were looking at as far as the needs for professional development. So we continue to look at what Oklahoma is happening in our state, and we look at, well, why are we considered rural, and we look at what are some of those challenges. Well, Oklahoma ranks in the top 10 of states, and that's not the best top 10. That's the top 10 of states most in need of addressing 5 gauges that are related to education. And those 5 gauges are how does the state see the importance of rural education? What are the diversity of our students and their families in the state? What are the educational policies in the context of what's happening in the policies in the state? What are obviously our educational outcomes, and how ready are our students to go to college? These 5 gauges were used, and within each gauge they had indicators that they looked at to determine these top 10 states. And so when they looked at the importance gauge of rural education, obviously they looked at the percent of funds that were going to rural districts. They looked at obviously the percent of rural schools. Some of the things they looked at in the diversity of rural students and their families were how many minority students, how many rural students were on individualized educational plans, how many of those rural students were English language learners. Then when we looked at, well, how did they gauge the educational policy context, they obviously looked at rural expenditures per student, state revenues to schools, what were the salary expenditures per instructional FTE in our state. And then obviously the educational outcomes gauge, they looked at the NAEP scores for 4th grade and 8th grade. And then college readiness, how did they determine that? They looked at the overall graduation rate in rural districts, looked at students who were eligible for free and reduced lunch, number of seniors taking the ACT that were in rural schools or the SAT, and then the number of those juniors and seniors in our rural schools that were taking at least one AP course. So when we look at being a basically rural state, obviously our stakeholders decided that those were some concerns, and they brought to the table some specific issues of rural education. So looking at our own experiences and what we were experiencing as we worked with rural school districts in the state of Oklahoma, and looking at where our state was and looking at what research says, our alliance contended that rural districts and their schools require effective teachers if we want to overcome those challenges, if we want to get out of that top 10. And when we look at the effective teachers, we look at teacher quality. And so how can we enhance that teacher quality through our professional development? Ultimately, we know that teachers are one of the top, have the top impact on student achievement, more so than any other entity in what's impacting schooling. So knowing this, we wanted to look at what's happening with professional development in our state, not only in rural school districts, but in all of our school districts. And so now I'm going to turn over the presentation to Dr. Catherine Steno, and she is going to share information with you about how did we gather information with our survey on professional development throughout the state of Oklahoma. Dr. Steno?
Thank you, Sharon. Thank you. Yes, I also have experience in non-rural and rural school districts throughout my 37 years in education. I was in Missouri and Texas before coming to Oklahoma, and after 37 years, I retired recently from the Office of Educational Quality and Accountability. And one of the joys I've had during this time was being part of this Rural Research Alliance. Almost 5 years ago, our alliance began to have many conversations around the topics that Sharon just mentioned, and two in particular that were quite critical. As she was saying, the quality of professional development was one thing that we were concerned whether or not rural school district teachers were actually being able to access. And the second issue at that time was the emerging teacher shortage. Because of this shortage, many teacher positions were being filled by emergency certified teachers. Most of those teachers had never attended a teacher preparation program. Thus, the need for quality professional development was intensified by this growing trend. Propelled by these two conjoining issues, the Alliance concluded that developing a survey study to discover what professional learning opportunities were available was not only timely, but certainly essential. Okay. So, with the support of the REL Southwest researchers, the Alliance members began to create 3 research questions that would guide our survey study. And because of our perception that rural teachers had less access to potentially promising professional development, there was an intentional purpose in the study to include a comparative analysis with rural and non-rural schools. Thus, it was important to understand how professional development, as research question 1 reflects here, how it was structured in both types of schools, rural and non-rural. Next, we have our second research question, which wanted to know about how these professional development efforts were planned. We were curious to know the overall approach from our rural schools. Were they approaching professional development planning through a district-wide perspective, or was it site-based, or was it as needed approach? And then, so on our third research question, we wanted to know what do teachers encounter when accessing professional development? The Alliance members were interested in knowing if there were supports available to help teachers access quality PD, and if so, what were those supports? Simultaneously, what were the barriers for teachers in accessing professional development? And how much of a barrier was the rurality factor in accessing quality professional development? So as you'll notice here on this slide, our survey was organized into 5 different topics. Each section had a set of questions assigned to it. And one important note I want to add here as you're looking at these 5 different aspects, that the principals were the only ones that were our survey respondents for this survey. So the survey topics focused only on formalized school or district-sponsored professional development, as opposed to informal and unreported professional development, which would have been beyond our scope of the study. Topics and related question sets were identified based on several factors, such as discourse between the researchers and our Alliance members also definitely contributed to identifying these 5 areas. I also want to point out here that this particular alliance was rich with experience and expertise as it related to the field of professional development. As you look on this slide, you will notice that for a quick review of the process of what we all went through as an alliance, there are 5 different steps or phases for which we went through in conducting this study. First, the REL Southwest researchers, who were also part of our alliance, gathered various types of literature to address the research questions. However, once into this research, a few studies met the criteria that was established at the onset. So the researchers had to expand their search to incorporate empirical studies that were not explicitly including the rural professional development, but they were more or less toward non-rural with some rural added aspects to that research. Next, the Alliance members supported the creation of the survey items that were developed by our REL Southwest researchers. The Alliance members were then engaged in an iterative process of revision, which resulted actually in about 4 different rounds of review. And both Sharon and Susan were key in helping this review process. After this process, the cognitive interviews were part of this phase. This, just to make sure that you all understand about what cognitive interviews are, I wanted to just mention that because at the beginning, I was unsure of exactly how cognitive interviews would fit into this process. But cognitive interviewing is a technique used to provide insight into participants' perceptions so that as they're examining information, the researchers are able to gather their feedback on the material presented. So this really helped us on clarifying the survey and making it even more presentable to our upcoming survey mail out. Also, the Alliance members suggested several of the principals that were part of this. There were 10 that were invited, and 5 of those accepted the invitation to be part of the cognitive interviews. They represented non-rural schools as well as rural. They represented pre-K through 12th grade. They represented pre-K through 5th grade, and then 9th through 12th grade schools. 2 important outcomes resulted from the cognitive interviews. One of those that we discovered was the principals all felt that the survey at the time was too lengthy. And then another outcome of the cognitive interviews was the misunderstanding of the concepts between formal peer coaching and professional learning communities. So the survey was adjusted by our researchers by changing the order of the items of the survey and then providing examples of what formal peer coaching looked like and to clarify those terms. Next was the administration of our survey, which occurred from the Office of Educational Quality and Accountability, from which I recently have retired. The survey was administered using SurveyMonkey, which is an online survey program. The first task was probably the most difficult, and that was in finding the emails for all 517 superintendents at the time, and the principals that were employed at those schools at the time. We had a list at our office, but it was a bit dated. So our researchers found a list from our State Department of Education, and the list was very helpful. It had emails for all the superintendents and principals. So this definitely was a go nugget when that was discovered. So at that point, we sent an email to the superintendents to let them know that we were wanting to invite their principals to participate in this first ever survey about professional development in Oklahoma. So at that point, after sending that out and after cleaning up the list of principals, because there were some duplicates, we began with a list of 1,825 principals, but after the cleanup, it was narrowed down to 1,609 principals that the surveys were sent to. And this occurred over a month that we sent things out. Unfortunately, right before we sent out our emails to the principals, the State Department of Ed had also sent out an email to participate in a survey. So many of our principals were confused. They thought they had already answered the survey when actually they had completed the survey from the State Department of Ed. So despite all of those obstacles, we still managed an impressive response rate. 51%, or 825 of the 1,609 principals completed the survey, with an additional 115 respondents partially answering the survey, making a total of 58% respondents. And this is also a question that was asked earlier, and so I want to make sure that we touch on this. Because the non-response rate was just above 50%, a non-response bias analysis was conducted. The purpose of the analysis was to determine whether the characteristics of schools whose principals did not take the survey differed from those whose principals did complete the survey. The non-response bias analysis indicated that there were only minor differences between responding and non-responding schools. So to eliminate the difference, non-response weights were created and applied to the data. As a result, the final findings of this study do indeed represent all Oklahoma schools. So I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Heidi Williams, our liaison for the Oklahoma Rural Research Alliance. Heidi?
Thank you, Catherine and Sharon. That was a very insightful overview of how we got to where we are and how we partnered with Alliance members who are in the field and working with schools and districts and our researchers. We didn't have any questions entered in the pod, but we did have one that was entered during the registration process. And Catherine, could you talk just a little bit about the role of the what role has communication technology played in this partnership, and what has been the most helpful communication tool?
Okay, thank you, Heidi. Just briefly, at each of our meetings, Heidi, who was our liaison, was always very intentional about how we would communicate in between meetings and during our meetings, whether those were face-to-face or by phone conference. Plan communication was a big part of our timeline tool. The plan usually included our calendars when we were in our face-to-face meetings. Also, many times, though, we were communicating by email, and if a meeting needed to occur, Dr. Williams would send out a doodle poll. And this became a very effective tool for us in being able to find out when the best times were for us to meet, either face-to-face or by phone conference. And mostly our Alliance members, if they were in the state, would meet face-to-face. But if they were out of state, sometimes they were able to come face-to-face, but a lot of times they would participate through phone conferencing during our face-to-face meetings. So I feel that the plan communication that Dr. Williams was able to provide kept this very organized, and I hope this answers the question.
I thought so. Thank you, Catherine. and then, Sharon, we had another question posed in the registration. What areas of PD garner the most positive response from educators, and what are some of the possible reasons? Could you address that?
Certainly. As part of the K-20 Center for Community Educational Renewal, we do a lot of professional development through our center here, and I can speak to what our personal experience is. And based upon that, I think more than anything, garnering positive responses from the educators we work with, it is based mainly on the professional development, that it is an authentic professional development. It's a time in which teachers are having an opportunity to engage in an authentic learning experience with the opportunity to have immediate application, to be able to leave that professional development activity and go directly into their classroom and have some kind of application from that experience. I think also, too, quite as important as that authentic experience is that professional development is based on their needs, not whether it's just their personal needs. It might be your district or site goals, and we find that it needs to be data-driven. Many times we see professional development, it's a one-shot deal. It's to fill 3 hours of time, and those are not going to garner positive experiences from the participants. But if you really want to look at what we see as specific topics that are being requested, those include STEM, training on STEM, implementing STEM activities into your classrooms. Another one that's very much sought after is authentically integrating technology into the classroom. And then I think, and Catherine alluded to this when she was talking about the large numbers in our state of emergency certified teachers. So that means we have a lot of educators in the field that may not have had any formal instruction on pedagogy. So we get a lot of requests and a lot of positive responses by just going in and working with teachers on a variety of instructional strategies. And that's as simple as grouping students to as more complex on working with research projects, etc.
Thank you. I think those are some excellent examples. We had another question here, Sharon and Catherine. I think we'll probably come back to Catherine first, but could you provide some examples of how you measure impact of professional learning?
Well, in my position when I was at the Office of Educational Quality and Accountability, one of the areas that I was responsible for was to review instructional delivery and to review program evaluation. And as you realize, most of our districts really do, especially our rural and smaller districts, do not have the access to the necessary tools and processes to measure impact of professional development that has been implemented in their schools. Many may feel that the end of the session feedback forms, where we measure satisfaction is sufficient, but not sufficient in understanding impact. Is it going to affect student achievement? Is it going to affect teacher behaviors? So I did some research, and I thought, how can we actually do this? And I found back in 1999, the National Staff Development Council, which now is Learning Forward, launched a 2-year initiative to answer that very question. And what they came up with during that 2-year time was, it was theoretical, and it was based on a theory of change evaluation and also based on a logic model. And they came up with 8 different steps on how to measure impact. And I have felt that this was truly very appropriate and easily implemented. So the step 1 asks a simple question: is the professional development that's been implemented, is it what they call, does it have evaluability? Can it be assessed? And then number 2, formulate some evaluation questions that will give us the answers we need. And then step 3 was to create the framework, the evaluation framework, and that would include the steps 4 through 6, collecting data, organizing that data, analyzing, and then interpreting that data to find out the impact. And then step 7, report to the district. And then step 8, evaluate the evaluation. So I felt this was an excellent one that I had actually begun to use in my work there at the Office of Educational Quality and Accountability.
Thanks, Catherine. Deanna wanted to know if there was a link to that study. If you don't have it right now, perhaps we could include it later. But
I actually sent it to Jackie yesterday. So Jackie, I don't know if you got it. Actually, I gave you the reference. You can find it.
Yeah, we'll find it. And
okay.
In the meantime, Sharon, you're at you're at the university. So could you give us some examples of how you measure impact of professional learning?
I can, and mine's kind of, I listened to Catherine, and I think we, at our center, we kind of simplified it a little bit. We are looking at Kirkpatrick's model professional development evaluation, and it's a 4-level model. The first level, as Catherine referred to, is just kind of that, what's the feedback, the participants' reaction to the training at that perceptional level, and it's truly just perceptional. You know, it's did they like it, did they like you, do they plan to use it, and again, a perception level. Level 2 is are they learning, and in order to assess this, you have to have some kind of pre-testing and post-testing measure on your feedback form, and if it's only a one-shot professional development, there's not going to be any time for them to go actually make applications, so that's not going to work. So you have to kind of see where you are in the type of professional development that you're delivering. But this one, you would have to have a pre-test and a post-test, and we've done that a lot when we worked in our grants, specifically our Gear Up grants, when we're working with teachers for a year-long coaching and mentoring session. And again, very intentional in what do you want them to know, and then what's going to be a pre-test and a post-test measure. Also along that line, though, is we've asked sometimes our principals who want to look at that, they can follow up with that. Then that third level is transfer, which is where you want to be. If you're a professional development provider that you're only going to be there one time, you're going to have to work with your administrators on what can they do to see if that knowledge is being transferred. And we've done that before in helping administrators set up. We have an app called ClassWalk, so having them set that up so that they gather pre-data before a professional development activity and then post-data on do they see that application of knowledge in the classroom. And then obviously that last level, again, is the time that has to be put in. It's what are the student results? Ultimately, the impact, is there a change in the teacher behavior, which is going to directly impact the student achievement? So that's how we work with it. Again, a lot of the first 2 levels may be somewhat in our control, but the last 2 levels are more in the control of the sites and how involved they want to be in looking at that teacher transfer and then actual results in student learning.
Thank you, Sharon. I hope all of our participants see that whenever we got to a table and started working together with Pia, our researcher, there was a lot of really powerful knowledge and experience brought to this partnership. It was not a one-way. They really steered this research project that we were on. And I have to say, we had a fantastic research lead, Pia Peltola. Jackie, if you'll just go ahead and switch to the next one, I think we'll go ahead and transition to Pia's session. And she was the primary contact person. She had other people working with her, but Pia was an awesome research partner because she was very open and willing to really talk to and dig in with our Research Alliance members to make sure that we targeted this study to what was really meaningful. Pia?
Thank you, Heidi. Can you hear me?
Oh, yes.
Great. Yes, this, it takes all kinds of talents to create a good questionnaire, and you cannot have a good questionnaire without participation and knowledge from content experts, and the REL Alliance members have provided that expertise and made sure that the questionnaire and its questions make sense to respondents. So it would not have been possible without their involvement. And as Catherine mentioned, this study started several years ago, and it has been a wonderful collaborative experience. And I am so pleased to be able to present you today the results from the study. And as was mentioned before, these are fresh from the oven, these results. They were released today. I will show you one or two findings from each one of the 5 survey sections that Catherine described a few minutes ago. The report obviously contains many more graphs and tables, and I encourage you to take a look at the results on your own. At the end of this webinar, we will provide you a link so you know where to find the report. I would also like to note that the questionnaire that was used to collect data for this study is included in one of the appendices of the report. So if anyone would like to use it or borrow questions from it, you are more than welcome to do that. So let's move now to the results. Almost all Oklahoma schools, rural or non-rural, offered at least one professional development format to their teachers, such as conference, workshop, or seminar. This slide shows the 2 professional development formats with the largest gap between rural and non-rural schools. The darker color bar indicates rural schools, and the lighter color one indicates non-rural schools in all these slides. As you can see, 91% of non-rural schools offered their teachers collaborative learning opportunities, while 61% of rural schools did the same. That is a 30 percentage point difference. On the right side on the slide, you can see that 83% of non-rural schools and 65% of rural schools made formal coaching or mentoring available for their teachers. Teacher-led professional development is another important form of professional development and includes train the trainers model and formal coaching and mentoring by teachers. A large majority of all schools in Oklahoma offered teacher-led professional development for their teachers. This slide shows the 2 teacher-led PD formats that have the largest gap between rural and non-rural districts. As you can see, 76% of non-rural school teachers offered formal coaching or mentoring to other teachers, while 62% of rural school teachers did the same. The results are similar for peer demonstrations of lessons, units, or skills. These large gaps between rural and non-rural schools in collaborative learning and teacher-led PD are important to note because these forms of localized PD may be the most successful forms of professional development, but may be more successful forms of professional development than the one-time offsite events. For example, collaborative learning, which occurs among peers who share an understanding of their particular teaching context, connects the PD more closely to teachers' goals in classroom teaching. So these types of ongoing and job-embedded PD may have a greater likelihood of producing instructional change than do more traditional one-time conferences, workshops, and other types of courses. And collaborative learning may also be easier to sustain over time given the logistical and financial challenges that schools face. In the goals and planning section of the survey, principals were asked how they typically decide what PD they offer to teachers. This slide shows the 3 most common objectives that drive principals' decisions about professional development they offer. In 53 to 67% of rural schools, principals typically selected PD opportunities because they support the school's or district's improvement goals, because they support teachers' use of student data to inform instructional practices, or because they address teachers' instructional needs that were identified in teacher evaluations. In non-rural schools, the pattern is similar, but a higher percentage of principals take each objective into account when they plan for professional development opportunities. The survey also asked about supports and barriers that teachers might face in accessing professional development. One of the items asked principals how often they were able to support their teachers' professional development by providing substitute teachers, common planning or collaboration time, or by giving students time off to accommodate teacher professional development. We are showing you the results here for the common planning and collaboration time because it has the largest gap between rural and non-rural schools. As you can see, in 37% of rural schools and 63% of non-rural schools, principals are typically able to provide teachers common planning or collaboration time to engage in PD activities. This slide shows results for schools that offer collaborative learning activities online or on-site, so it's limited to those type of schools. Most schools that offer teachers on-site or online collaborative learning activities support the collaboration in multiple ways. For example, schools provided a meeting place for administrators supported teachers for trying new instructional activities. Here we show the three supports where there is the largest gap between rural and non-rural schools. These are formally assigning group leaders to collaborative learning teams, providing protocols such as critical sense or formal identification of essential issues, and online space where you can share ideas and resources, such as blogs and social networking, but excluding email. The gap between rural and non-rural schools for these types of supports vary from 6 to 14 percentage points, the largest gap being for the collaboration protocol. These results move us from supports to barriers that keep teachers from participating in professional development opportunities. This slide shows the three most commonly reported reasons why teachers miss professional development in Oklahoma schools in school year 2016-17. The most common reason, according to principals, was scheduling conflicts with other schools or professional activities. 62% of rural school principals and 49% of non-rural school principals reported that teachers were unable to take advantage of professional development opportunities because they conflicted with other school responsibilities. The second most common reason in rural schools was distance to professional development opportunities. And the third most common reason why rural teachers miss PD opportunities was that they occurred outside contract hours. So for rural school teachers, scheduling conflict with other school responsibilities was by far the most common reason for missing PD opportunities. Among schools that offer teacher-led professional development, the two largest barriers that prevented rural teachers from providing formal training or coaching to their peers were lack of nearby train-the-trainer sessions where teachers could get training, and insufficient staff, meaning teachers didn't have enough colleagues to make peer training or coaching worthwhile. These reasons here were noted, as you can see, by 30 to 34% of rural school principals and 15 to 27% of non-rural school principals. So in summary, these results of the results of the survey show that majority of rural schools offer many types of professional development opportunities, but pretty much always fewer than non-rural schools. And while rural schools provide substantial support to teachers' professional development, it's less likely to be provided by other teachers. For example, common planning and collaboration time, teacher-led coaching and mentoring, and collaborative learning activities are offered by a lower percentage of rural than non-rural schools. So these findings align with previous studies that suggest that teachers in rural schools are less likely than teachers in non-rural schools to rely on each other for professional development. And this is likely to be partially because rural schools tend to be small, which obviously limits the number of teachers who share similar professional needs and interests and who can provide particular expertise. So rural school size, coupled with geographic distance from other teacher networks and specialized professional development opportunities, foster what previous studies have labeled professional isolation among rural schools. So this inability to use teachers as resource for other teachers obviously limits the ongoing PD that rural schools can offer to their teachers and makes it much more difficult for rural schools to attract and retain teachers. This completes my part of the presentation, and Susan Pinson will continue from here.
Good afternoon, this is Susan. I am here at the Oklahoma State Department of Education. The State Department of Education was thrilled to be able to participate in the Oklahoma Rural Schools Research Alliance because we wanted to have the data that targeted the context that we experienced here in Oklahoma. As Sharon presented earlier, with such a large percentage of students in our state who are receiving instruction in a rural school, and the fact that professional learning is one of the change levers that can impact teacher quality and effectiveness and ultimately student achievement, we were more than eager to participate in this study. The definition of professional development in the Every Student Succeeds Act was provided by Learning Forward. It's the organization known as the National Leaders in Professional Learning. When you dive into that definition, there is a Part B, as you see highlighted there, with 6 words that are key characteristics of high-quality professional learning. And in addition to those 6 key characteristics, the definition includes 18 examples of professional development activities that are considered to be high quality. For example, allow personalized plans for educators, support the recruitment and training of effective teachers, advance teacher understanding of evidence-based, effective instructional strategies, and support teachers' skills in working with EL students and with parents and families. As the state education agency and districts work on plans for EFSA implementation, one key consideration will be how to leverage Title IIA funds, if available, to best support professional learning. Some action steps for the State Department of Education for all schools, rural and non-rural, is the need to increase educators' awareness and understanding of high-quality PD. Using this definition and examples of high-quality PD is defined in EFSA as a benchmark for the professional learning opportunities offered and facilitated by the State Department of Education. and working to ensure that professional learning opportunities and resources are equitably available and shared throughout the state. Oklahoma's ESSA plan, which was just submitted to the United States Department of Education, outlines 6 measurable goals, and 2 of the goals will require targeted professional learning opportunities for all educators, rural and non-rural. One of those goals is we are going to ensure that 100% of students in grades 6 through 12 develop a useful and meaningful individual career academic plan. The acronym for that is an ICAP. In order for our agency to feel like we have reached every 6th through 12th grader, we're going to have to give focused attention on the rural settings and providing professional learning for both the counselors and the teachers so that they can guide students in developing those individual career academic plans. A second goal in the Oklahoma ESSA plan is to increase student access to effective teachers, thereby reducing the need for emergency certified teachers by 95%. Now, the remote nature of rural settings is difficult even without the urgency to bring meaningful professional development to emergency certified teachers. And we certainly are seeing a trend that these teachers are becoming even more abundant in rural areas. So as the agency has been diving into this definition and examples of high quality professional learning, we found that the 2 pages of typed information in the ESSA plan for professional development was a little hard to embrace. And so an agency graphic artist designed this infographic format so that we could work with understanding professional development in a more user-friendly format. This infographic is available for download in the handout section, so you can click on that handout and download it. And you might want to note that if you are going to print this infographic, it prints best on paper that's at least legal size, if not larger. If you notice the wallpaper background on this infographic, it includes words like sustained, intensive, collaborative, job embedded, classroom focused, and data driven. Those are those characteristics that we previously talked about that form the foundation for quality professional learning that positively impacts teachers' effectiveness and student performance. Data that we received from the Teacher Professional Development Survey support that these following actions that the State Department of Education is considering are highly important. First, the Oklahoma State Department of Education needs to expand opportunities of teachers in rural schools to collaborate with colleagues. We know that distance is one of the barriers that may prevent some of that collaboration, as well as the common planning time to allow for that. So we are looking for ways creatively and intentionally to leverage technology to allow some of that collaboration to occur. Another aspect of the data that we received from that survey is focused on teachers in rural schools implementing teacher-led professional development. So how can the State Department of Education support teachers better in coaching and mentoring, again, particularly with the high number of alternatively and emergency certified teachers in the state? Since that common planning or collaboration time is limited for teachers, the State Department of Education has been really focused on how we can provide bite-sized learning pieces in formats that are easily accessible. Our Office of Curriculum Instruction has been providing some
professional learning that's called PD on your plan and podcast on your plan. And you'll see in the chat box some links are being provided for you that are showing you some of these resources in this digital format. In addition, the agency will be facilitating monthly webinars on digital teaching and learning strategies, and all the webinars will be recorded and archived on our website. The data from the professional development survey showed us that one of the most common barriers that teachers in rural schools face is lack of nearby train-the-trainer sessions for teachers to attend and insufficient local staff for those trainings to be worthwhile. The agency continues to consider multiple formats for all teachers across the state to participate in growth opportunities. For the past 2 summers, the State Department of Education has traveled throughout the state and presented a free conference for all educators. This conference travels not only to metro areas in the state, but also rural areas in multiple geographic regions. We stop in about 7 different regions over a 2-week period and include session topics on such as academic standards, classroom management, working with special education, gifted and talented and EL students, assessments, instructional technology, and more. Our attendance this past summer, we reached over 7,000 educators in our state. All those presentations are then posted on our website online for anyone who could not attend. The new Teacher Leader Effectiveness, or TLE legislation, includes a component on individualized program of professional development called a Professional Learning Focus, or PL Focus. General guidelines on how to implement the PL Focus component are posted on the TLE webpage, and that link has also been provided for you. The 2017-2018 school year is a pilot year during which all school districts will implement the PL Focus with at least 25% participation per site. Full implementation will begin in the 2018-2019 school year. This component of TLE is one of the examples of professional development in that definition of ESSA, and that is to allow personalized plans for educators to address their needs. The PL Focus is established collaboratively between a teacher or administrator and the evaluator. It opens the dialogue to allow educators to explore ways to grow professionally. Because goals are aligned with a specific indicator or element in the TLE framework, it moves the evaluation to a level that centers on growth and choice. The PL Focus component is not rated or scored, so there is nothing that is tied to that is part of the TLE qualitative score. So it frees educators to feel like they are in charge of their professional learning to choose a path of interest or need as identified in the qualitative framework. Now, incorporating this choice and constant learning as part of the PL Focus is able to highlight differentiated learning. It meets educators where they are in terms of roles, longevity in their careers, growth goals, professional learning interests, and student needs. So this new feature that is part of our TLE system, Teacher Leader Evaluation System, is highlighting professional learning in a way that targets what teachers are seeking And as a result of that, the State Department of Education is going to be looking at the data from this teacher professional development survey and finding ways to provide resources to support teachers' professional learning focus. So at this time, I'm going to turn this back to Dr. Heidi Williams, who is going to facilitate some questions and answers during this portion.
Thank you, Susan and Pia. I thought that was an excellent tie-in of how the State Department and our other presenters here, Sharon and Catherine, are using this information from the study to inform their work. And we have several people that, as we indicated at the beginning with our poll, that have some experience with rural educational challenges. For example, Deanne said right at the very beginning that rural schools may have limited access to support services, which did show up in the survey, and that their distance may be an issue, and that did show up in the survey as well. So some of the other questions that we have had asked is, I thought I would come back to you, Susan, while we've still got you fresh. And let's see, Kevin, that's who it was. Kevin Beaumont wanted to ask, will the data be tied to the teacher effectiveness or to student achievement?
No, the data will not be tied to either of those. The data from the survey is being used to inform the format and the content or characteristics of professional learning that's offered. We are founding our professional learning on the standards for professional learning as provided by Learning Forward, and really using that definition of ESSA to be the benchmark of the guiding practices for professional learning.
Okay, thank you. Pia, we had several questions come up about the survey development. Could you provide just a little bit of information about the methodology?
Sure. Catherine already talked a little bit about it, but in general, it followed the standard best practices of questionnaire development. It started with literature review and expert reviews, and it went through cognitive testing with several principles. It was revised after those interviews. The survey was administered online using the advantages of online instrument format. And then as was mentioned, because of the response rate, it was 50 or 58%, depending on how you calculate it, but they include everybody who completed the survey completely, or also the partial completers. A non-response bias analysis was conducted, and because that showed just minor little differences between non-respondents and respondents, non-response weights were created, and all the results were adjusted by those weights, which means that the results represent all the schools in Oklahoma. I can provide if there's other specific pieces of people want to know about, I'm happy to discuss.
Well, it could get quite involved, and I had said I would do this last, but you brought it up. Could you briefly explain how the non-response rates are created?
How the non-response rates were created. They were created using logistic regression models. I think that we had two statisticians work on those. I wasn't involved in them. I think they used the Poisson model, and I don't know, I can't remember, this was done a year or a year and a half ago, so I don't, and I wasn't involved hands-on with it, so I don't remember all the details, but I would be happy to pick up the report and share that if there's somebody who would like to see that.
Okay. All right. Thank you. And Susan, I'm going to jump back to you. One that just showed up in our chat pod. I hope you don't mind a pop quiz here. But Dana, and I hope I'm saying it right, Dana, wants to know, do teachers choose their own professional development, or do principals and districts choose that for them?
Great question. I'm going to answer it in two parts. Professional development in Oklahoma is managed at the local level. So the districts set up a professional development committee and set their own guidelines for professional development within their district. There are certain 75 professional development points need to be obtained over a 5-year period, but districts have the right to determine what constitutes the points that they are offering for their teachers. Generally, an hour equals a point, but districts can set that up. So professional development is, the choice is going to vary by district, and it may even vary by school. The piece of TLE legislation called the PL Focus, that professional learning growth opportunity is something that will be developed collaboratively between the teacher and his or her evaluator and the administrator and his or her evaluator. So the PL Focus is targeted for both teachers and administrators, developed collaboratively with the evaluator.
Hey, thank you. Thank you. Sharon.
Yes.
This one is from the registration, whenever people registered, and they wanted to know, how are you encouraging and supporting principals in focusing on meaningful professional development opportunities for teachers? Wow.
Okay. Well, from our perspective at the K-20 Center, we do have a program of working with school principals and superintendents. It's called our Phase 1 Leadership Seminar. And then after leaders have attended that, they can come to what we call Return to Leadership. And in our Return to Leadership program, it's a 3-day professional development opportunity for principals and administrators to come together, an opportunity for networking, but the professional learning provided for them for those 3 days is based upon data-driven decision-making. So looking at data, analyzing data, determining what professional needs are going to be prevalent in their schools or their district, and then working with them to be an instructional leader and to design, to develop and design a professional learning opportunity for their staff to actually go back and deliver it, and then to gather more data to see if there's been an impact. It has been quite successful, I think, for our leaders that have attended. We started doing this 2 years ago, and are really finding that our leaders are wanting and also needing this type of professional development. They come in and we kind of do a simple project in that we know a big impact on student learning and student engagement. So we work with them on what does student engagement look like. they go deliver some professional development after they have collected that data. And in the process of those 3 days, we are modeling instructional strategies for them to actually use in their professional development. We're finding that they get really excited about it because they're actually seeing changes in teacher behavior when they go through this process of data-driven decision-making, looking at data, determining what the needs are for their staff, providing some focused professional development on that need, and then going back and collecting more data to see if there has been an impact. Probably one of the most telling comments by a leader that was with us last year made a statement, and she said, "I am so thankful for this opportunity for this training because of where our state is financially in supporting professional development with our individual school sites. I am now the main professional development provider at my site because I don't have the funds." She was from a very remote rural district, and so she cannot spend a lot of money to send people away for training, nor does she have the money to bring professionals in to train her staff. So does that kind of answer what you were wanting to know about that?
I think so, yeah. Susan, perhaps from the State Department perspective, how is the state encouraging and supporting school leaders and focusing on meaningful professional development opportunities for teachers?
The State Department of Education received 2 different grants, and the focus of both of these grants has been on leadership development. One initiative is called Lead to Succeed, and that it is a cohort of principals that come together for a full school year, meeting just about monthly, and receiving concentrated professional learning in the area of leadership. We have already graduated 2 different cohorts from the Lead to Succeed, and the idea to build capacity within our state and continue this is that certain administrators who have graduated from the Lead to Succeed program then become the trainers for another cohort. And that is what is taking place this year, where some people from Lead to Succeed are now helping facilitate that training of another cohort. The second initiative is called Moving Up. This training is targeting either assistant principals who aspire to the role of being a principal, or principals who are young in that role of being a principal. So we're trying to, just like we do our novice teachers in the state, we want to catch these principals early in their transition to that role of being an administrator and providing some targeted professional learning to support them. And we are in the second year, second cohort of the Moving Up initiative.
Wow. Which really lends in, thank you, Susan, that's great. It leads into another question that we got from registration. How is the State Department of SEA balancing this need between a statewide change in practice as well as supporting this individual teacher growth?
We really look at supporting the individual teacher growth through this professional learning focus component of TLE, since all teachers across the state will be participating in this. During this pilot year of implementation, we have 15 different school sites throughout several regions of the state that the agency is going to be focused on in a more intensive, collaborative, supportive way. We hope to take the feedback we learn from these pilot schools to then carry us into the 2018-2019 school year of full implementation. So we're seeing that as addressing the needs of all teachers, all administrators in the state. And then our grant initiatives of Lead to Succeed and Moving Up, it's certainly a more targeted, smaller group of educators that we're impacting. But the idea is if we can develop them as trainers, that we can continue to share this quality professional learning with other administrators, then we're hoping that that will continue in years to come.
Thank you. Thank you. And then Debbie just asked, what are the most common types of things that teacher requests for professional development? Sharon, could you talk about that just a little bit?
Well, our experience usually results from a beginning conversation with a school administrator requesting professional development for their sites or their district. And we have learned through some hard knocks, I might say, that before we go directly into planning and delivering professional development based solely on a request by a principal or superintendent, we are getting down to the, I guess, the battleground level, and we are trying to assess needs of the teachers and talking to teachers. So before we go do a professional development, if it's based on a grant, if we're working off a grant, the needs are already there for us. If it is, I'm just visiting with a particular school district and a superintendent or a principal is requesting the professional development, I usually will have a pretty in-depth conversation with what are your school goals, what are your district goals, give me some data that is kind of leaning toward where you want to go here. But then what we have found to be most effective is to actually, even when we get that information from an administrator at the district, to do a very quick, very simple kind of needs assessment survey with the teachers. And if we have a targeted topic that we have gleaned from the administrator, we will base that needs assessment survey on that. So for example, if they have told us we want a professional development activity working on differentiating instruction or personalized learning, then we'll craft a very quick survey and send it to the teachers, and then we'll use that result whenever we plan that survey. And it is just, I'm telling you, it's very quick and simple. You know, what do you already know about? If we have a supposedly predetermined topic from an administrator, we might say the PD session on differentiation will be successful and relevant to me if. So we leave it really broad on those to determine some needs of the teachers. On the topic of blank, my confidence level is to, because sometimes they may already know a lot of information and they need something beyond what we might be giving them. So that's how we have found to gather some really quick information pointed to maybe a topic that's already been mentioned, or we may just go out and just leave it wide open.
Thank you. I think we have time for one more question. And we've got more that came in through registration and such. But Catherine, how have you been able to ensure quality and fidelity across these PD opportunities for teachers?
One of the things that I always suggest is that if a district is buying into a professional development that is systemic, then, and it should be, if you are wanting the actual professional development to be sustained, the district should formulate a process that provides a checkup system. Much like you would have in your classroom, a formative assessment and a summative assessment, you would have this type of checkup, and it should be facilitated through your professional learning communities. And teachers, leaders can be their own evaluators of how well the professional development is being implemented. Is the fidelity there across the district or across the school? It may be just site-based. And is the quality there? So through these formative and as the professional development is just beginning to be implemented, it would be formative, and then after a while, more of a summative look.
Thank you. Thank you. Unfortunately, we are running out of time, and we'd really like to thank everyone for all of your wonderful questions. They make this a lot more meaningful for you and for us. We truly appreciate the dialogue and what you have been sharing with us. And we'd like to encourage you to stay in touch with us if you've got any other questions, anything else. There's my email address there on the slide. It's hkwilliams@air.org. And if you would like, just go to our website, the REL Southwest.cedar.org. It has this study and several other studies that this alliance has worked on. And you can also follow us on Twitter. We have to have our Twitter accounts. And if there's, please stay in touch. Let us know whatever is on your mind. And remember, our next webinar, we're collaborating with the REL Midwest on exploring educator mobility, supply, and demand. And we will have another different person from the Oklahoma State Department of Education speaking at that webinar, and I think you will find it very, very informative, and I encourage you to sign up. So make sure that you click on that registration link in the chat box, and please fill out the stakeholder feedback survey for us. And the link is there, the very last entry in the chat pod, right there with the questions and answers. And once again, thank you very, very much for joining us. This has been a very interactive and informative session for both us as presenters and as receivers. Thank you. Goodbye.